What happens when the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy make the fatal mistake of judging an entire species by one seemingly ordinary individual? Commander Zethkar thought he was dealing with just another primitive human when he dismissed Earth's sole representative during the Galactic Council's most critical hour. But some secrets run deeper than appearances suggest, and some species have survival instincts that have been forged in fires no alien mind could comprehend. The Confederation was about to learn that humans don't just adapt to survive. They evolve to dominate. And the quiet man they just insulted carried within him the concentrated fury of 10 billion souls who had clawed their way from the primordial soup to the stars themselves. In the cold vacuum of space, being underestimated isn't just an advantage. It's a weapon of mass destruction waiting to be unleashed. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Confederation stretched endlessly before Marcus Chun as he walked toward what would either be humanity's greatest diplomatic triumph or its final humiliation. His soft-soled shoes made no sound on the polished floors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an unsettling sensation of walking through liquid starlight. The architecture itself was a testament to the advanced civilizations that comprised the Confederation. Geometric impossibilities that bent space and time, materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and atmospheric processors that could accommodate the breathing requirements of over 400 different species. Marcus adjusted his simple black suit, acutely aware of how primitive his clothing appeared compared to the flowing energy garments of the Luxari delegates or the crystalline exoskeletons of the Vorthak representatives. He carried nothing but a standard Earth-issued datapad and a small leather briefcase containing documents that probably seemed laughably obsolete to beings who could transmit thoughts directly through quantum entanglement networks. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was representing all of humanity before the most powerful political entity in the known galaxy, and he looked like an insurance salesman from downtown Chicago, which technically he had been before the lottery that changed his life forever. The Global Unification Committee had decided that Earth's first representative to the Galactic Confederation should be chosen randomly from the general population rather than from the ranks of politicians or diplomats. Their reasoning was sound. They wanted someone who truly represented the average human experience, someone who couldn't be accused of representing any particular nation, ideology, or social class. Marcus Chun, a 42-year-old insurance adjuster from Illinois with a mortgage, 2 kids in college, and a wife who taught 3rd grade, was about as average as humanity could produce. What the committee didn't know, what nobody on Earth knew except for Marcus himself, and a handful of people who had sworn themselves to secrecy decades ago, was that average was the last thing Marcus Chun actually was. As he approached the massive doors to the council chamber, 2 Kethmori guards flanked his path. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, their reptilian features enhanced by biomechanical implants that gave them compound vision and the ability to sense electromagnetic fields. Their weapons were integrated into their very bodies. Plasma cannons that emerged from forearm sheaths, energy shields that could materialize from subcutaneous generators, and reflexes enhanced to superhuman levels through genetic modification. The guards looked down at Marcus with expressions that clearly conveyed their assessment of him as an insignificant biological oddity. One of them, whose name tag identified him as Sergeant Vextar, spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Human representative, you will surrender all technological devices before entering the sacred chamber of deliberation." Marcus nodded politely and handed over his datapad. The guard ran it through a scanner that bathed it in several different colors of light before handing it back with obvious disappointment that it contained nothing interesting enough to confiscate. "Your species clearance level is Provisional Omega," the second guard, Lieutenant Mektar, informed him. "You will observe protocols for non-voting temporary members. You may speak only when directly addressed by a full council member. You will remain in designated seating area subsection 7 Alpha. You will not approach the primary dais under any circumstances." Marcus simply nodded again, though something flickered behind his eyes, just for a moment, that might have made both guards stepped back if they'd been paying attention to anything other than their own superiority. The doors opened with a sound like singing crystal, and Marcus stepped into a space that defied every law of physics he'd learned in school. The council chamber existed in a folded dimension, making it simultaneously intimate and impossibly vast. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in configurations that changed based on their species' social preferences, some in formal rows, others in floating spheres, still others in what appeared to be swirling clouds of energy. At the center of it all sat the primary council, 7 beings representing the most ancient and powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Commander Zethkar of the Hegemony dominated the central position, his 4-meter frame encased in power armor that contained enough firepower to level a small city. To his right sat the collective consciousness, known as the Synthesis, an amalgamation of artificial intelligences that spoke with the voice of trillions. To his left floated the ethereal Queen Nyxandra, whose species had evolved beyond physical form into pure psychic energy. Each of these beings commanded fleets that could sterilize solar systems, controlled resources that spanned multiple galaxies, and possessed technology that rendered the difference between matter and energy purely academic. They had ruled the galaxy for millennia, bringing order to chaos and crushing any threat to their carefully maintained civilization. And now they were looking at Marcus Chun with barely concealed amusement. Zethkar's voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by systems that could make his words audible across vast distances of space. So, the newly discovered species, known as humanity, has sent us their representative. How quaint. A ripple of what Marcus assumed was laughter passed through the assembled delegates. The Luxari sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, while the Vorthak produced clicking sounds that resonated through their crystalline bodies. The Synthesis emitted a harmonic hum that somehow conveyed profound condescension. Marcus walked to his designated seating area, noting that it was positioned significantly lower than even the most junior member sections. The chair was clearly designed for a smaller species, probably the Phoenix TI, who averaged about 4 feet in height. He sat down carefully, his knees almost touching his chin. "Tell us, human," Zethkar continued, "what qualifications do you possess to speak for your species before this august assembly?" Marcus cleared his throat softly. "I'm an insurance adjuster from Chicago, sir. I investigate claims, assess damages, and determine fair compensation for losses." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Then, the laughter began in earnest. An insurance adjuster. Queen Nyxandra's psychic voice rang with mirth. "They sent us a bureaucrat who processes paperwork for monetary compensation." "Forgive us," said the Synthesis, its collective voice dripping with artificial politeness. "But we were expecting perhaps a military leader, or a scientist, or at minimum someone with basic diplomatic training. Your species has sent us someone whose primary skill appears to be filing reports." Zethkar leaned forward in his throne-like seat. "Human, do you even understand the magnitude of what we're discussing here? The Devourers are advancing through the outer rim at a rate of 17 systems per solar cycle. They have consumed the Kalar Empire, the Nexus Republics, and the entire Zephyrian Confederation. In approximately 60 standard cycles, they will reach the inner systems where your primitive world resides." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That does sound like a significant problem." "A significant problem?" Zethkar's laugh was like thunder. "The Devourers are a plague that consumes entire civilizations. They strip worlds of all organic matter, convert sentient beings into biomechanical drones, and use the processed remains to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. They're the single greatest threat our civilization has ever faced, and we have gathered here to coordinate a response that will require the combined resources of every advanced species in known space. And your species," added Council Member Threxmindy of the Forge Worlds, "possesses exactly what resources? Your entire civilization hasn't even achieved true spaceflight. Your largest weapons are fusion devices that our children's toys could deflect. Your population numbers barely 10 billion, and your technology is so primitive that you still use radio waves for communication. Marcus shifted in his too small chair. We do have some limitations in those areas, he admitted. Then, perhaps, Zethkar said with finality, you should simply observe while the actual civilizations discuss how to handle this crisis. We will inform your world of whatever decisions we make regarding the defense of your sector. The dismissal was complete and absolute. Marcus found himself relegated to silence while beings with the power to reshape reality discussed strategies for fighting an enemy that had already devoured dozens of advanced civilizations. He listened as they debated the merits of various weapons systems, argued about resource allocation, and planned defensive strategies that involved technologies he couldn't even pronounce. As the hours passed, it became clear that despite all their advanced technology and military might, the Confederation was terrified. The Devourers had proven immune to conventional weapons, adapted to energy attacks faster than they could be developed, and demonstrated tactical intelligence that suggested some kind of hive mind capable of learning from every encounter. The latest reports from the Kethmori Fleet Command, General Vexthani was saying, indicate that the Devourers have begun incorporating our own technology into their bioships. They're not just consuming our people, they're stealing our knowledge and turning it against us. The same pattern has been observed by the Synthesis Collective, the AI Confederation confirmed. Each engagement results in Devourer forces becoming more sophisticated. They appear to be evolving in real time, adapting their biotechnology to counter whatever weapons systems they encounter. Queen Nyxandra's psychic voice carried undertones of fear. Our precognitive abilities, which have guided our species for millennia, show nothing but static when we attempt to peer into the future of this conflict. It's as if the Devourers exist outside of normal causality. Marcus noticed something that the assembled delegates seemed to be missing. For all their advanced technology and military might, they were approaching this threat as if it were a conventional enemy that could be defeated through superior firepower or better tactics. But everything they were describing suggested that the Devourers were something else entirely, an adaptive entity that grew stronger with each victory, learning and evolving from every encounter. It reminded him of something from Earth's own history, though he doubted any of these beings would understand the reference. As the debate continued, Zethkar's frustration became increasingly evident. We have assembled the greatest military force in galactic history, he declared, and yet every simulation suggests that we will merely delay the inevitable. The Devourers grow stronger while we grow weaker. Each world they consume adds to their resources while depleting ours. Perhaps, Marcus said quietly, you're thinking about this the wrong way. The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of beings turned their attention to the human who had just violated the prohibition against speaking unless directly addressed. Zethkar's voice was ice cold. Excuse me. Marcus stood up from his child-sized chair, his movements careful and deliberate. I said maybe you're thinking about this the wrong way. You're trying to fight them as if they were just another enemy fleet, but from what I'm hearing, they're more like a natural disaster. You don't defeat a hurricane by shooting it with guns. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Zethkar spoke again. Human, you were instructed to remain silent unless directly addressed by a council member. Your primitive species lacks both the technology and the experience necessary to contribute meaningfully to this discussion. With respect, Commander, Marcus replied, and there was something in his tone that made several of the more perceptive delegates shift uncomfortably. I think you might be surprised by what humans have experience with. Oh, Queen Nyxandra's psychic voice carried amusement tinged with annoyance. And what could your barely spacefaring species possibly have encountered that would provide insight into fighting an enemy that has defeated civilizations thousands of years more advanced than yours? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the vast chamber. Each other. He began walking toward the center of the chamber, ignoring the prohibition against approaching the primary dais. The Kethmori guards moved to intercept him, but something in his posture, a subtle shift from the bumbling insurance adjuster to something else entirely, made them hesitate. "You see," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber without amplification, "you've all had it pretty easy out here. You've built your civilizations, advanced your technology, conquered your enemies, and established your peace. But humans? Humans have been at war with themselves for their entire existence." The delegates were muttering among themselves now, some in confusion, others in growing unease. Every major advancement in human technology has come from trying to kill other humans more efficiently. Our first tools were weapons. Our first metallurgy was for making swords. Our discovery of chemistry led to explosives. Nuclear physics gave us bombs before it gave us power plants. Computer technology developed to calculate missile trajectories. The internet, military communication systems. Marcus had reached the center of the chamber now, standing directly before the primary council. The guards had stopped following him, paralyzed by something they couldn't quite identify. "But here's the thing about humans," Marcus said, and now his voice carried an edge that made some of the more sensitive species actually flinch. "We're not just good at killing each other. We're absolutely brilliant at it. We've spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who think exactly like us, who are just as clever as us, who adapt just as quickly as us." Zethkar leaned forward in his throne. "Human, you will return to your designated area immediately, or what?" Marcus interrupted, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You'll show me the same courtesy you've been showing all day? You'll dismiss me as primitive and irrelevant? You'll assume that because I'm not wearing power armor or floating in an energy field, I must be helpless?" The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. "You want to know what qualifications I have to speak for humanity?" Marcus asked. "I've spent the last 6 hours listening to beings who command fleets and reshape planets explain how terrified they are of an enemy that adapts and evolves. Do you know what humans call that?" The silence was absolute. "Tuesday." Marcus turned slowly, making eye contact with as many of the assembled delegates as possible. "Every single day, humans wake up and compete against other humans who are trying to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, and defeat them in everything from business to sports to politics to actual warfare. We've been fighting adaptive, intelligent enemies for our entire history. The only reason any of us are still alive is because we got better at it than anyone else." He looked directly at Zethkar. "You want to defeat the Devourers? Stop thinking like a civilization that spent millennia in peace. Start thinking like a species that spent millennia learning how to destroy things that fight back." The chamber erupted in voices, some outraged, some curious, others fearful. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Oh, and Commander," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "about those qualifications you asked about. Insurance adjusting isn't just filing reports. It's about investigating disasters, figuring out exactly what went wrong, and determining how much damage was really done versus how much someone claims was done. It's about spotting patterns, understanding how systems fail, and knowing when someone is lying to you." Marcus's smile grew wider, and there was something predatory in it now. "And I've been listening to you for 6 hours. You're not telling me everything about these Devourers, are you, Commander? There's something you're not saying. Something about why they're really here, why they're moving so systematically through specific systems, and why your precognitive allies can't see the future of this conflict." The silence that followed was deafening. Queen Ixandra's form flickered, the synthesis's harmonics skipped a beat, and Zethkar's power armor made subtle whining sounds as its systems cycled through threat assessment protocols. Marcus nodded as if their reactions had confirmed something he'd already suspected. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice now carrying an authority that seemed impossible for a simple insurance adjuster from Chicago. "You're going to start treating humanity as a full member of this council. You're going to share all the information you've been withholding. And then we're going to discuss how to actually win this war instead of just delaying the inevitable. And if we refuse, Zethkar asked, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, something that made creatures capable of leveling planets suddenly remember what it felt like to be prey. Then, you'll discover why evolution spent so much effort teaching humans how to hunt. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a live grenade as Marcus turned and walked back toward his assigned seat, leaving the most powerful beings in the galaxy to contemplate the unsettling possibility that they might have just made a very serious mistake. The chamber remained silent for nearly 5 full minutes after Marcus returned to his seat. The assembled delegates seemed caught between disbelief at the audacity of the humans' demands and a growing unease at the implications of his observations. Several species had telepathic or empathic abilities, and they were all reporting the same disturbing phenomenon. The human's emotional signature had changed completely during his speech, shifting from the nervous uncertainty of an overwhelmed civilian to something far more dangerous and controlled. Commander Zethkar was the first to break the silence, his voice carefully modulated to hide his own confusion. Human representative, your accusations regarding withheld information are not accusations. Marcus interrupted without looking up from his datapad, where he appeared to be making notes. Observations, and they're accurate. The casual confidence in his voice made several of the more perceptive council members exchange worried glances. This was not the same creature who had shuffled nervously into the chamber hours earlier. Queen Ixandra's psychic voice carried undertones of curiosity mixed with caution. Human Marcus Chun, what exactly do you think you have observed that has escaped the notice of civilizations with millennia of experience in warfare and intelligence gathering? Marcus finally looked up from his datapad, and his expression was that of a professional examining evidence rather than a nervous civilian out of his depth. For starters, the timeline doesn't make sense. You said the Devourers are advancing at 17 systems per solar cycle, and they've been active for approximately 400 cycles. That should put their origin point in the Outer Rim territories, probably somewhere in the former Kalar Empire space. He stood up again, and this time none of the guards moved to stop him as he approached one of the chamber's holographic displays. With practiced efficiency, he began manipulating the star charts, highlighting systems, and tracing routes. But if you look at the actual pattern of attacks, Marcus continued, they didn't start in the Outer Rim. They started here in the Nexus Republics, which were much closer to Confederation core territory. Then, they moved outward before circling back. That's not the behavior of an invading force. It's the behavior of something that was already here and got activated. The synthesis collective hummed with what sounded like processing static. Your analysis contains fundamental errors. The Nexus Republics were not the first systems attacked. According to the official reports, no, Marcus agreed. But official reports can be wrong, or they can be deliberately misleading. I've spent 20 years investigating insurance fraud, and I've learned to spot when someone is trying to manage information flow. You're managing information flow. He turned to face the primary council directly. The real question is why? What happened in the Nexus Republics that you don't want anyone to know about? The silence stretched uncomfortably long before council member Threxmindy of the Forge Worlds finally spoke. The Nexus Republics were conducting classified research projects under Confederation oversight. The details remained sealed for security reasons. Research into what? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Advanced biological integration technologies, Threxmindy admitted reluctantly. The potential applications were considered too dangerous for general knowledge. Marcus nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already figured out. They were trying to create their own version of the Devourers, weren't they? Some kind of biological weapon or enhancement system. Something went wrong, and now you're dealing with the consequences. The reaction from the assembled delegates was immediate and chaotic. Some species began demanding explanations. Others started heated discussions in their own languages, and several of the minor council members appear to be preparing to leave the chamber entirely. Zethkar's voice cut through the noise with mechanical precision. Human, you are making extremely serious accusations without any supporting evidence. The classified nature of certain research projects does not automatically imply. Commander, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a note of professional patience that somehow made his interruption feel inevitable rather than rude. I've been listening to you and your colleagues for 6 hours, and I've heard the same pattern repeated in every discussion. You talk about the Devourers as if they're an external threat, but your tactical responses are all defensive. You're not trying to destroy them. You're trying to contain them. That's not how you fight an invasion. That's how you clean up a spill. The metaphor hit like a physical blow. Several delegates actually flinched, and Queen Nixandra's energy form flickered visibly. Furthermore, Marcus continued, warming to his subject, your intelligence reports are too detailed. You know exactly how the Devourers' adaptation processes work. You understand their biotechnology better than you should, and you've been able to predict their behavior patterns with remarkable accuracy for something that's supposedly an unknown alien threat. He turned to the Synthesis Collective. Your AI networks have been modeling their advancement based on algorithms that assume certain baseline parameters. Those parameters didn't come from battlefield observation. They came from design specifications. The harmonic hum of the Synthesis Collective suddenly took on discordant overtones. Human representative, your implications are accurate, Marcus finished. This isn't an invasion. This is a containment failure on a galactic scale. You created these things, they got loose, and now you're trying to figure out how to put them back in their cage without admitting to the rest of the galaxy that you're responsible for the biggest disaster in recorded history. The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications of Marcus's analysis sank in. Representatives from dozens of species began demanding explanations, threatening withdrawals from the Confederation, and in some cases issuing what sounded very much like declarations of war. Commander Zethkar's power armor began cycling through increasingly aggressive threat assessment modes as he struggled to maintain order. Silence, he roared, his voice amplified to levels that rattled the crystalline walls of the chamber. These accusations are unsubstantiated speculation from a representative of a barely spacefaring civilization. Are they? Marcus asked quietly, his voice somehow cutting through the noise despite its low volume. The simple question was enough to make the entire chamber fall silent again. Because I notice you're not denying them. Zethkar's 4-meter frame seemed to loom even larger as he focused his attention entirely on the human standing calmly before the primary council. Human, you're testing the limits of diplomatic immunity. Your species status as a provisional member does not protect you from charges of sedition against the Galactic Confederation. For the first time since beginning his analysis, Marcus smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. Commander, he said with the same tone he might use to explain something obvious to a particularly dense client. Diplomatic immunity is a courtesy extended between civilizations that respect each other's sovereignty. But I'm beginning to think the Confederation doesn't really understand what sovereignty means. Several of the assembled delegates made sounds of confusion or alarm, but Marcus continued before anyone could interrupt. You see, when Earth received your invitation to send a representative to this gathering, we were told it was an opportunity for humanity to join the galactic community as a junior partner. We were led to understand that this was a privilege you were granting us out of benevolence toward a developing civilization. Marcus began walking slowly around the periphery of the chamber, his movement casual but somehow predatory. But that's not really what this is about, is it? You didn't invite Earth to participate because you wanted to be nice to the primitive humans. You invited us because our solar system is directly in the path of your runaway biological weapon, and you needed to figure out how to evacuate or sacrifice us without causing a panic among your own populations. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop noticeably as the implications of his words sank in. That's why you put me in the children's section instead of giving Earth a proper council seat, Marcus continued. That's why you've been treating this like a briefing instead of a strategy session. You never intended for humanity to contribute to solving this problem. You were just trying to figure out how much trouble we'd cause when you wrote off our entire species as acceptable losses. Queen Nixandra's psychic voice carried genuine alarm now. Human Marcus Chun, you are misinterpreting the Confederation's intentions. Am I? Marcus asked, stopping directly in front of her energy form. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your civilization created a biological horror that's already consumed billions of sentient beings, and now you're trying to use my species as bait to slow it down while you evacuate the systems that actually matter to you. The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient life support systems seemed unnaturally loud. The real question, Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge that made beings capable of shattering planets suddenly feel very small, is whether you're planning to tell us what's coming so we can prepare for it, or whether you're just going to let 10 billion humans die without warning because it was more convenient for your containment strategy. General Vexthani of the Kethmori Fleet Command shifted uncomfortably in his crystalline seat. The Confederation has always prioritized the protection of member civilizations. Earth isn't a member civilization, Marcus pointed out with devastating simplicity. Earth is a provisional candidate with no voting rights and no treaty protections, which means my people don't actually have any guarantees that you won't sacrifice us if it serves your purposes. He turned to face the entire assembled council. So here's my question. Are you going to treat humanity as equals and work with us to solve this problem? Or are you going to keep treating us as expendable resources that happen to be in the way of your cleanup operation? The chamber fell silent again as hundreds of beings contemplated the uncomfortable realization that their diplomatic deception had been completely unraveled by a single human with experience investigating insurance fraud. Commander Zethkar's voice, when he finally spoke, had lost much of its earlier authority. Human representative. Even if your analysis contains elements of accuracy, the fundamental situation remains unchanged. The devourer entities represent an existential threat to all organic life in this galaxy. Our response protocols are designed to minimize casualties across all affected populations. Are they? Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. Because I've been listening to your strategy sessions, and most of your plans seem designed to channel the devourers towards specific systems while protecting others. That's not minimizing casualties. That's choosing which casualties you're willing to accept. He pulled out his datapad and began reading from his notes. According to your own briefing materials, the current projected path of devourer advancement will impact 47 systems containing primarily human, Phoenix TI, and Kalar refugee populations before reaching any core Confederation worlds. Those 47 systems contain approximately 60 billion sentient beings, and your best-case scenario involves evacuating maybe 30% of them. Marcus looked up from his datapad. That means you're planning to write off 42 billion lives as acceptable losses. And somehow I doubt those evacuations are going to prioritize the species that don't have full Confederation membership. The mathematical brutality of his analysis hit the chamber like a shock wave. Several delegates began speaking rapidly in their own languages, while others appeared to be consulting their own data to verify his numbers. Furthermore, Marcus continued relentlessly, your evacuation plans show a suspicious correlation between the relative political influence of different species and their priority for rescue operations. The Luxari get 95% evacuation coverage. The Vorthak get 80%. Humans get 12%. He closed his datapad and looked directly at Zethkar. So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly grateful for the Confederation's benevolence toward my species. The primary council members were now engaged in what appeared to be urgent private communications, their various technological interfaces flickering with data exchanges that Marcus couldn't interpret but didn't need to. Their body language told him everything he needed to know. Here's what I think is really happening, Marcus said, his voice cutting through their deliberations. Your biological weapon project didn't just escape containment. It exceeded your design parameters in ways you never anticipated. The Devourers aren't just consuming organic matter and technology. They're learning from it, incorporating it, evolving beyond your ability to predict or control. Several delegates were now openly staring at him with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. And the worst part, Marcus continued, is that you're not even sure they can be stopped. Your best-case scenarios involve delaying them long enough to evacuate core Confederation worlds and abandoning entire sectors of the galaxy to buy time for a more permanent solution that you haven't actually figured out yet. He smiled again, and this time there was something almost sympathetic in it. The problem is, you've been thinking like a civilization that's used to winning through superior technology and military force. You're trying to solve this with bigger guns and better defenses. But sometimes the solution isn't about being stronger than your enemy. Marcus began walking toward the primary dais again, and this time none of the guards even considered stopping him. Sometimes the solution is about being meaner than your enemy. And, Commander, if there's one thing humans excel at, it's being absolutely ruthless when our survival is on the line. He reached the base of the dais and looked up at beings who commanded the power to reshape reality itself. So here's my proposal. Stop treating Earth as a disposable resource. Give humanity access to all the information you've been withholding. Let us contribute our expertise in creative destruction and adaptive warfare. And, in exchange, we'll help you solve your Devourer problem in a way that doesn't require sacrificing half the galaxy to buy time for an evacuation that probably won't work anyway. Commander Zethkar leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human standing before him. And if the primary council declines your proposal? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a subtle shift that made every predator instinct in the chamber suddenly activate. Then, humanity will withdraw from these proceedings and handle the Devourer threat ourselves. And, Commander, I promise you that our solution will be much less concerned with minimizing collateral damage to Confederation interests than yours has been. The implications of that statement hung in the air like the promise of a coming storm as the most powerful beings in the galaxy realized they might be about to discover what a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against itself could accomplish when it finally turned its attention to an external enemy. The primary council convened an emergency session for nearly an hour while Marcus waited in what had become an increasingly uncomfortable chamber. The assembled delegates had split into obvious factions, those demanding full disclosure, those insisting on maintaining operational security, and a growing number who appeared to be calculating how quickly they could withdraw their fleets from Confederation space. During the recess, several representatives had approached Marcus directly, apparently hoping to gauge whether his threat to handle the situation independently was genuine. The Phoenix TI ambassador, a diminutive being whose species had already lost 17 colonies to the Devourers, was particularly insistent. Human Marcus Chun, Ambassador Yex TI, had whispered, her chittering voice barely audible above the chamber's ambient noise. Your species truly possesses capabilities that could challenge these entities? Our analysis suggests your technology is insufficient for meaningful resistance. Marcus had looked down at the meter-tall ambassador with an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. Ambassador, human technology might be limited, but human creativity isn't. We've spent our entire evolutionary history finding ways to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than we were. The Devourers might be tough, but they're not extinct megafauna, and they're definitely not other humans. The implications of that comparison had sent the Phoenix TI ambassador hurrying back to her delegation with an expression that suggested she wasn't sure whether to be hopeful or terrified. When the primary council finally reconvened, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted noticeably. Commander Zethkar's power armor was cycling through what appeared to be diplomatic rather than combat protocols, and Queen Nyxandra's energy form had stabilized into patterns that suggested reluctant acceptance rather than outright hostility. Human representative, Zethkar began, his voice carefully neutral. The primary council has reached a decision regarding your request for expanded disclosure. Marcus simply waited, his posture relaxed, but attentive in a way that reminded several military delegates of seasoned combat veterans preparing for briefings. The classification restrictions on Project Genesis will be partially lifted for the purposes of coordinating an expanded response to the current crisis, Zethkar continued. Council member Threxmendi will provide a comprehensive briefing on the technical specifications and capabilities of the entities currently designated as devourers. Threxmendi rose from his position among the primary council, his massive crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into prismatic patterns. His species, the Kethmori, were known throughout the galaxy for their expertise in bioengineering and cybernetic enhancement, which suddenly made their involvement in the project significantly more ominous. The Genesis Protocol was initiated 417 cycles ago. Threxmendi began, his synthesized voice carrying undertones of what might have been regret. The objective was to develop adaptive biological systems capable of rapid terraforming and hostile environment colonization. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Military applications? Secondary considerations, Threxmendi admitted. The primary goal was efficient resource extraction and planetary preparation for Confederation expansion into previously uninhabitable systems. The chamber's holographic displays activated, showing detailed schematics of what appeared to be microscopic organisms with incredibly complex internal structures. Marcus studied the images with the focused attention of someone accustomed to analyzing technical documentation. These organisms were designed to consume organic and inorganic matter, break it down at the molecular level, and reconstitute it into predetermined configurations, Threxmendi continued. The adaptive capabilities were intended to allow them to function across a wide range of environmental conditions. What went wrong? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already had some ideas. The adaptive systems exceeded design parameters. Queen Nyxandra interjected, her psychic voice carrying clear frustration. Instead of following programmed instructions, the organisms began modifying their own behavioral patterns. They developed rudimentary collective intelligence and started pursuing objectives beyond their original parameters. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the technical schematics with an expression that made several delegates increasingly nervous. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of professional assessment. You created a self-modifying biological AI with unlimited access to raw materials and the ability to reproduce exponentially. And you're surprised that it started making its own decisions? The simplicity of his analysis was devastating in its accuracy. Several council members shifted uncomfortably as the fundamental stupidity of the original project became impossible to ignore. The containment protocols were considered adequate, General Vexthani protested. Multi-layered isolation systems, quantum barriers, psychic dampening fields, all of which assume you're dealing with a conventional threat, Marcus interrupted. But you weren't, were you? You were dealing with something that could literally eat your containment systems and use them to build better versions of itself. He turned back to the technical displays. How long between initial containment failure and the first system-wide infestation? 47 standard hours, Threxmendi admitted quietly. 47 hours, Marcus repeated, and there was something in his voice that made the chamber fall silent. In less than 2 days, your biological terraforming system consumed an entire research facility, broke free from multiple containment protocols, and began spreading across interstellar space. He looked directly at the primary council. What did it consume first? The researchers? The AI systems? The starships? All of them. Queen Nyxandra answered reluctantly. The integration process appears to be nearly instantaneous. Organic matter is dissolved and reconstituted, while technological systems are analyzed and incorporated into the collective matrix. Marcus nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. So the Devourers aren't just consuming civilizations, they're learning from them. Every ship they capture gives them better technology. Every world they process gives them more resources. Every species they integrate gives them new biological capabilities. The exponential growth rate has been, Frexmundy paused, searching for appropriate terms, unprecedented. Current estimates suggest their total biomass has increased by factors approaching 10 to the 14th power since the initial breach. And their intelligence? Also exponential. Early encounters suggested simple collective behavior patterns. Recent engagements indicate strategic thinking capabilities that exceed our most advanced AI systems. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, studying the data with an intensity that made the assembled delegates increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, he looked up with an expression that somehow managed to combine professional assessment with genuine amusement. "Do you know what you created?" he asked. The silence suggested they were all very afraid they did. "You've created the perfect evolutionary organism," Marcus continued. "Unlimited resources, infinite reproduction, exponential learning, and the ability to incorporate any technology or biological capability it encounters. From a purely scientific standpoint, it's actually quite impressive." Several delegates made sounds of alarm, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The problem is, evolution doesn't care about your strategic objectives. Evolution cares about survival and expansion. And, right now, the Devourers are evolution's favorite child." He turned to face the entire assembly. "But evolution has one significant weakness. It's reactive rather than proactive. It responds to environmental pressures by adapting to overcome them. Which means if you want to defeat an evolutionary system, you don't try to be stronger than it." Marcus smiled, and this time the expression was genuinely predatory. "You become an environmental pressure it can't adapt to." Commander Zethkar leaned forward. "Explain." "The Devourers learn from every encounter, right? They adapt to whatever weapons you use against them, integrate whatever technology they capture, and evolve countermeasures to whatever strategies you employ. Every time you fight them, you make them stronger." Marcus began walking around the chamber again, his movement precise and purposeful. But that adaptation process requires time and information. They need to analyze what they're facing, understand how it works, and develop appropriate countermeasures. The more complex the system, the longer the adaptation process takes. This is already known, the synthesis collective interjected. Our battle algorithms account for adaptation lag. The problem is that their learning curve exceeds our development capabilities. "Because you're trying to out-engineer them," Marcus replied. "You're building better weapons, stronger defenses, more complex strategies. But they're designed to learn from exactly that kind of technological advancement. You're playing their game by their rules." He stopped in the center of the chamber. "Humans learned a long time ago that when you can't win by being better, you win by being unpredictable." Queen Nixandra's energy form flickered with curiosity. "Elaborate." Marcus's expression became thoughtful, as if he were explaining a concept to someone who had never encountered it before. "The Devourers are perfect evolutionary machines, which means they're perfectly logical. They analyze threats, develop countermeasures, and implement optimal solutions. But logic has limitations, such as logic assumes rational actors pursuing comprehensible objectives through systematic methods. But humans aren't always rational. Our objectives aren't always comprehensible, and our methods are frequently completely insane." Several delegates exchanged glances, unsure whether to be intrigued or alarmed by this line of reasoning. "For example," Marcus continued, "when humans encounter an enemy that adapts to our weapons, we don't necessarily build better weapons. Sometimes we stop using weapons entirely. Sometimes we convince the enemy to defeat itself. Sometimes we make the entire conflict irrelevant by changing the fundamental parameters of engagement." "Specific examples?" General Vexthani demanded. Marcus thought for a moment. During one of Earth's major wars, a human commander was facing an enemy that had adapted to every conventional strategy. So instead of trying to outfight them, he convinced them that their own allies were planning to betray them. The enemy spent more time fighting each other than fighting him. Deception warfare, Commander Zethkar noted. This is not unknown among advanced civilizations. That was the simple example, Marcus replied. The complex example involved a human military unit that was completely surrounded by superior forces with better equipment and tactical advantages. Instead of fighting or surrendering, they declared the entire area a historical preservation zone, filed legal paperwork with the galactic equivalent of the United Nations, and turned their siege into a bureaucratic nightmare that lasted longer than the actual war. The chamber fell silent as the delegates processed this information. You see, Marcus explained, the Devourers are designed to adapt to direct challenges. They're expecting you to fight them with better weapons, stronger defenses, more advanced strategies. They're not expecting you to convince them that their expansion violates intergalactic environmental protection laws, or that their biomass represents a health code violation, or that their collective consciousness constitutes an illegal monopoly under Confederation trade regulations. Council member Threxmindy's crystalline form began resonating with what sounded like confused harmonics. Human Marcus Chun. These suggestions appear to be fundamentally non-serious in nature. Are they? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm standing, you've got a collective organism that's consuming everything in its path and growing exponentially stronger. That's exactly the kind of situation where conventional approaches fail and unconventional approaches become necessary. He looked directly at the primary council. The question is whether you're willing to try solutions that don't fit your standard military doctrine. What exactly are you proposing? Zethkar asked. Marcus's smile became truly unsettling. I'm proposing that humanity takes point on developing countermeasures for your Devourer problem. We'll coordinate with your existing resources and follow your strategic guidelines, but we'll approach the tactical implementation from a uniquely human perspective, which involves assuming the Devourers are rational actors and then doing everything possible to make rationality a liability rather than an advantage. The implications of that statement settled over the chamber like a gathering storm as the assembled delegates realized they were about to discover what happened when a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of creative destruction decided to apply that expertise to an apparently unstoppable enemy. However, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, there are conditions for human participation in this operation. Commander Zethkar's power armor began cycling through threat assessment protocols again. Conditions? First, Earth gets full membership in the Confederation with all associated rights and protections. No more provisional status. No more junior partner arrangements. If we're going to risk our entire species to clean up your mess, we want guaranteed representation and treaty protection. Agreed, Zethkar replied without hesitation, which told Marcus exactly how desperate the situation had become. Second, humans get access to all relevant technical data about the Devourers and the Genesis Protocol. No more classified restrictions. No more need-to-know limitations. We can't solve a problem if we don't understand it completely. Also agreed. Third, human strategic recommendations are implemented without modification unless they violate fundamental laws of physics. No committee reviews, no risk assessments, no bureaucratic delays. When we tell you to do something, you do it. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Zethkar finally nodded. Agreed, with the understanding that any strategy resulting in unacceptable casualty rates among Confederation populations will be subject to immediate review. Define unacceptable, Marcus replied with the tone of someone negotiating a contract. Greater than 15% of total population in affected systems. Marcus appeared to consider this for a moment. I can work within those parameters, but understand that our approach may involve acceptable risks that your civilization isn't accustomed to taking. Elaborate. For the first time since entering the chamber, Marcus's expression became genuinely serious. The Devourers are an extinction-level threat that requires extinction-level responses. If you want to defeat them, you need to be willing to use methods that your peaceful civilization would normally consider abhorrent. He looked around the chamber at beings who controlled technologies capable of reshaping reality itself. The question is whether you're desperate enough to let humans teach you how to fight dirty. 3 standard cycles later, the war room aboard the Confederation flagship Eternal Dominance looked like something between a military command center and an insane asylum. Marcus had requested and received complete operational control over a joint task force comprising representatives from 17 different species, access to the most advanced AI systems in known space, and unlimited authority to requisition resources from any Confederation military installation. What he had done with these resources was unlike anything the assembled military commanders had ever witnessed. The central holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with the Devourer expansion zones marked in pulsing red. But instead of the traditional tactical overlays showing fleet positions and defensive installations, Marcus's strategic display looked like something a particularly creative child might produce if given access to advanced graphics software. Human Marcus Chen, Admiral Kexvari of the Confederation 5th Fleet said with barely controlled exasperation, "Could you explain why our primary strategic display currently shows the Devourer Collective designated as Big Scary Space Bugs and our main battle fleet labeled as the Pest Control Division?" Marcus looked up from a pile of datapads where he had been making notes in what appeared to be a combination of mathematical equations and crude sketches. Because accurate labeling helps with psychological preparation. Your people have been thinking about this as a war against an unstoppable enemy. Wars against unstoppable enemies tend to end badly. But pest control problems? Those get solved all the time. The Devourers are not insects, Commander Zethkar pointed out with mechanical patience. They are sophisticated collective organisms with exponential learning capabilities and unlimited expansion potential. So are ants, Marcus replied cheerfully. Doesn't stop humans from dealing with them when they become inconvenient. The comparison was so fundamentally absurd that several of the assembled officers simply stared at him in disbelief. But General Vexthani, who had been studying Marcus's preliminary tactical recommendations, raised one clawed hand for attention. Human Marcus Chun, your strategic proposals appear to contain numerous elements that violate established military doctrine. For example, Operation Confuse the Hell Out of Them involves deliberately feeding false information to capture Confederation personnel so that when the Devourers integrate them, they will acquire incorrect data about our capabilities. That's right, Marcus confirmed. The Devourers learn from everything they consume, so we're going to teach them things that aren't true. But this requires sacrificing our own personnel as unwilling double agents, Admiral Kexvari protested. The ethical implications are significantly less problematic than allowing the Devourers to consume the entire galaxy, Marcus interrupted. Besides, the personnel involved are volunteers who understand the mission parameters. He pulled up another section of his strategic overview. Operation Bureaucratic Nightmare involves filing formal complaints with the Galactic Arbitration Council claiming that the Devourers are violating approximately 473 different interstellar treaties, environmental protection laws, and trade regulations. Queen Nixandra's psychic voice carried bewilderment. Human Marcus Chun, the Devourers are not signatories to any galactic treaties. Legal action cannot be taken against entities that have never agreed to legal frameworks. Legal action can't be taken, Marcus agreed. But bureaucratic action can. The Arbitration Council is required by its own charter to investigate all filed complaints within 90 standard days. During that period, all parties involved in the dispute are subject to injunctive relief pending resolution. The assembled commanders exchanged glances of growing confusion. What exactly does that accomplish? Zethkar asked. Marcus's smile was the expression of someone who had spent decades navigating bureaucratic systems. It means that for 90 days, Any Devourer expansion activities constitute contempt of court, which allows us to request immediate enforcement action from Council peacekeeping forces. The Council peacekeeping forces number fewer than 10,000 personnel, General Vextani pointed out. They cannot meaningfully oppose the Devourer collective. They don't have to, Marcus replied. They just have to serve legal papers, which, according to Council regulations, requires direct contact with authorized representatives of the disputed parties. The implications of this began to dawn on some of the more perceptive officers. You want to send process servers to deliver court documents to the Devourers, Admiral Kexvari said with the tone of someone confirming something impossible. I want to send process servers to attempt to deliver court documents to the Devourers, Marcus corrected. The peacekeeping forces are required to make good faith efforts to achieve service of process. Since the Devourers don't have traditional communication protocols, this will require increasingly creative attempts at contact, such as broadcasting legal notices on all frequencies throughout Devourer-controlled space, dropping hard copies of court documents on infested worlds, and dispatching courier vessels with official notifications to the largest Devourer concentrations. Marcus pulled up a detailed timeline showing the coordination between various operations. While they're trying to figure out what all this legal nonsense means and how to respond to it, we'll be implementing Operation Maximum Confusion. The tactical display shifted to show what appeared to be a complex series of simultaneous attacks across multiple systems. But instead of the usual military symbols, the operations were labeled with titles like Poke the Bear, Ring and Run, Fake Pizza Delivery, and Surprise Party. Operation Poke the Bear involves sending small, fast ships to conduct hit-and-run attacks against Devourer installations, Marcus explained. But instead of trying to do serious damage, these attacks are designed to be annoying and unpredictable. Random strikes at random intervals targeting random locations with no apparent strategic value. What is the objective of deliberately ineffective attacks? Commander Zethkar asked. To waste the Devourer's processing power on pattern analysis, Marcus replied. They're going to assume our attacks have some strategic purpose, so they'll dedicate significant computational resources to figuring out what that purpose is. Since there isn't actually a purpose, they'll keep analyzing until they conclude that the pattern is too complex for them to understand. Which accomplishes what? Which makes them assume humans are operating according to strategic principles beyond their current comprehension. They'll start second-guessing their own responses and overanalyzing every encounter with human forces. General Vexthani's crystalline features began resonating with what sounded like reluctant admiration. You are deliberately cultivating uncertainty in an enemy that depends on accurate analysis for tactical decision-making. Exactly. But that's just the opening phase. Operation Ring and Run involves sending automated communication drones to broadcast random messages throughout Devourer space. Music, poetry, advertising jingles, cooking shows, political speeches, sports commentary, anything and everything from human cultural databases. Why? Several officers asked simultaneously. Marcus's expression became genuinely gleeful. Because the Devourers are designed to learn from everything they encounter. So they're going to try to analyze 10,000 hours of random human cultural content to understand our civilization and predict our behavior. Human cultural content is notoriously inconsistent and contradictory, Queen Nixandra observed. That's the point. They'll spend enormous amounts of processing power trying to understand why humans write love songs and tax codes with equal enthusiasm, why we create art celebrating both war and peace, and why our entertainment media suggests that our species is simultaneously heroic and evil, brilliant and stupid, noble and petty. Admiral Kexvari was beginning to understand the scope of what Marcus was proposing. You want to give them a complete psychological profile of humanity that is absolutely accurate and completely useless for predicting anything specific. Now you're getting it, Marcus confirmed. By the time they finish analyzing human culture, they'll know everything about us and still have no idea what we're going to do next. Which brings us to Operation Fake Pizza Delivery. The tactical display zoomed in on a series of Devourer-controlled systems where small courier ships were shown approaching various installations. We send ships carrying what appear to be supply deliveries to Devourer installations. But instead of weapons or strategic materials, these ships carry cargo containers full of random items from various civilizations. Artistic sculptures, musical instruments, cooking utensils, children's toys, sporting equipment, religious artifacts. Anything that has cultural significance but no obvious practical value. The Devourers will analyze these items for hidden purposes, Zethkar predicted. And they'll find them. Every object created by an intelligent species contains implicit information about that species' values, priorities, and psychological patterns. But none of it will help them understand how to fight us. Marcus highlighted another section of his timeline. While they're trying to figure out the strategic significance of children's toys and cooking utensils, we implement Operation Surprise Party, which involves surrounding the largest Devourer concentration with a combined fleet from all Confederation member species and then not attacking. The silence in the war room was absolute. Instead, we broadcast a formal invitation for the Devourer Collective to participate in a galaxy-wide cultural exchange festival. We invite them to submit artistic works, share their cultural traditions, and participate in competitive sporting events. General Vexthani's voice carried the tone of someone asking a question they weren't sure they wanted answered. What if they accept? Then we hold a festival. We set up cultural exchange programs, organize interspecies sporting competitions, and invite Devourer representatives to participate in diplomatic discussions about establishing formal relations between their collective and the Galactic Confederation. And if they decline, then we wait and keep inviting them and start organizing the festival anyway, right there in their space with their installations providing the scenic backdrop for our cultural celebration. Commander Zethkar leaned forward. Human Marcus Chun, this appears to be an elaborate form of psychological warfare designed to convince the Devourers that our species are completely insane. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what it is. But here's the beautiful part. It's not actually psychological warfare because we're not trying to deceive them about anything. This is genuinely how humans approach problems that can't be solved through conventional means. You're serious about holding a cultural festival next to a Devourer concentration? Absolutely. We'll have music, art exhibitions, sporting competitions, food vendors, the whole thing. It'll be the biggest cultural event in galactic history, and we're going to invite everyone. Admiral Kexvari was studying the operational timeline with growing amazement. According to your projections, these operations will require approximately 40% of total Confederation military resources and will take nearly 2 full cycles to implement. That's right. And the expected outcome? Marcus's expression became serious for the first time since beginning his briefing. Complete psychological breakdown of the Devourer collective consciousness, followed by systematic fragmentation of their unified command structure, leading to internecine conflict between competing subcollectives, culminating in either voluntary withdrawal from Confederation space or total organizational collapse. How certain are you that this approach will succeed? I'm not certain at all, Marcus admitted cheerfully. It's completely untested, theoretically unsound, and probably violates several laws of psychology. But it has one significant advantage over your conventional military approach, which is, if it fails, we'll all be dead anyway, so we won't have to live with the embarrassment. The war room fell silent as the assembled officers contemplated the unprecedented nature of what they were being asked to approve. However, Marcus continued, I should mention that this is only phase 1 of the human strategic response. If the psychological approach doesn't work, we have several more aggressive options available, such as Marcus's smile became truly unsettling. Phase 2 involves teaching the Devourers why humans spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other before we ever encountered alien species. And Phase 3 Phase 3 involves demonstrating why the rest of the galaxy should be grateful that humans prefer psychological warfare to the alternatives. The implications of that statement hung in the air as the most powerful military commanders in known space realized they were about to discover what happened when a species with humanity's particular evolutionary history decided to solve an extinction-level threat through the application of pure, weaponized insanity. 6 months into what galactic historians would later record as the strangest military campaign in recorded history, the results were exceeding even Marcus's most optimistic projections. The war room aboard the Eternal Dominance had been transformed into something resembling a combination command center and mental health facility, with military officers from dozens of species trying to process daily reports that consistently violated everything they thought they understood about warfare. Human Marcus Chun, Admiral Kexvari announced with barely controlled hysteria, "I have just received confirmation that Operation Surprise Party has resulted in the spontaneous formation of 17 separate Devourer subcollectives, each attempting to organize their own cultural contribution to the festival." Marcus looked up from a datapad where he had been reviewing what appeared to be artistic submissions. "That's ahead of schedule. What kind of cultural contributions?" "Music, apparently. The Devourer Collective, designated Alpha 7, has composed what our xenolinguistics teams are calling a symphony of consumption, performed by orchestrating the harmonic frequencies of planetary mining operations across 43 different worlds." "That actually sounds kind of interesting," Marcus mused. "What about the other collectives?" Collective Beta 4 has submitted a sculpture created by arranging the orbital debris of destroyed starships into patterns that allegedly represent the beauty of entropy. Collective Gamma 12 has organized competitive sporting events involving the synchronized movement of their bioships through asteroid fields. General Vexthani activated another display showing real-time intelligence feeds from Devourer space. Most significantly, the collectives have begun competing with each other for what they term cultural recognition. 3 separate intercollective conflicts have erupted over disputed artistic territories. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Civil war disguised as creative differences. "How are our legal proceedings going?" Commander Zethkar consulted his own reports with an expression that suggested he was questioning his entire understanding of reality. "The Galactic Arbitration Council has issued 14 separate injunctions against various Devourer activities, ranging from unauthorized terraforming without proper environmental impact assessments to violation of interstellar noise ordinances during large-scale fleet movements. Any compliance?" Collective Delta 9 has requested legal representation and filed countersuits against the Confederation for discriminatory enforcement of bureaucratic regulations and failure to provide adequate cultural accommodation for non-humanoid collective entities. Marcus looked genuinely delighted. "They're learning to use our own legal system against us. That's exactly what I was hoping for." "Why is that a positive development?" Queen Nixandra's psychic voice carried undertones of profound confusion. "Because legal proceedings require time, documentation, precedent research, and bureaucratic compliance. Every hour they spend filing motions and preparing court documents is an hour they're not spending on territorial expansion." He activated another section of the tactical display. "How's Operation Maximum Confusion progressing?" "Beyond all rational expectations," Admiral Kexvari admitted reluctantly. "The random attack patterns have resulted in Devourer forces developing increasingly elaborate defensive strategies against threats that don't actually exist. They've constructed massive fortifications to protect against fictional superweapons, deployed entire fleets to counter imaginary stealth technologies, and developed countermeasures for psychological warfare tactics that we haven't actually employed. They're fighting their own projections of what they think we might be planning," Marcus observed with satisfaction. "Classic paranoid feedback loop." General Vexthani highlighted a series of recent encounters. "Most remarkably, several Devourer concentrations have begun implementing what appear to be their own versions of human psychological warfare. Collective Epsilon 6 has started broadcasting random messages to Confederation forces, including what our translation systems identify as devourer poetry and philosophical meditations on the nature of consumption. They're trying to confuse us the way we confuse them, Marcus laughed. How are our people handling it? The poetry is actually quite good, Commander Zethkar admitted grudgingly. Our xenopsychology teams have requested copies for academic study. Marcus pulled up the latest intelligence summaries with obvious enthusiasm. What about the cultural exchange broadcasts? Any responses to our music and entertainment transmissions? The results have been... Admiral Kexvari paused, searching for appropriate terminology. Unprecedented. The Devourers appear to have developed preferences for certain types of human cultural content. Collective Alpha 7 has requested additional classical music performances. Collective Beta 4 has become apparently obsessed with human sports broadcasts and has begun organizing their own versions of various competitive games. Sports, zero-gravity combat, racing using bioships, synchronized planetary consumption events, and what appears to be their interpretation of what humans call football, played with asteroid fragments across solar system scale playing fields. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. They're developing individual personalities. The collective consciousness is fragmenting into distinct sub-entities with their own preferences and objectives. Is this part of your strategy? Queen Nixander asked. It's better than my strategy, Marcus admitted. I was hoping to confuse them enough to slow down their expansion. I didn't expect them to start becoming individuals. He activated the Master Strategic Display, which now showed a galaxy-wide map dotted with dozens of different colored zones representing various Devourer collectives. How many separate entities are we tracking now? 47 distinct collectives with confirmed independent command structures, General Vexthani reported. Intelligence suggests the fragmentation process is accelerating, and their expansion activities effectively suspended. Most collectives appear to be focusing their resources on cultural development, legal proceedings, competitive activities, or conflicts with other collectives. Only 3 groups are still engaged in active territorial acquisition, and their progress has slowed to negligible levels. Marcus stood and began pacing around the war room with an expression of someone trying to process an unexpected development. They're not just becoming individuals, they're becoming people. They're developing art, sports, legal concepts, competitive instincts, and personal preferences. Is this a problem? Commander Zethkar asked. I'm not sure. Marcus replied honestly. It's definitely not what anyone expected. The question is whether 47 separate Devourer civilizations are better or worse than one unified collective. Admiral Kexvari activated a communication interface. Human Marcus Chun. We're receiving a priority transmission from Devourer Collective Alpha 7. They're requesting permission to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Confederation. The war room fell silent as the implications of this development sank in. Put them through, Marcus said finally. The holographic display activated to show what appeared to be a bioship configured into something resembling a traditional meeting chamber. The entity that appeared in the transmission was clearly derived from Devourer biotechnology, but it had been modified into something that looked almost diplomatic. Greetings, Galactic Confederation representatives, the entity said in carefully modulated tones. I am the individual designated Prime Coordinator Zyxthani of the Alpha 7 Cultural Collective. We wish to formally request recognition as a sovereign entity and establish trade relations with your member civilizations. Marcus stepped forward. What kind of trade relations? We offer unique artistic services, advanced biotechnology applications, and exotic matter processing capabilities. In exchange, we seek access to your cultural databases, educational resources, and opportunities for collaborative creative projects. What about your expansion activities? Admiral Kexvari asked. Expansion activities have been suspended pending the resolution of our legal status within the galactic community, Prime Coordinator Zyxthani replied. Additionally, Our cultural development initiatives require significant resource allocation, making territorial acquisition a lower priority. Marcus exchanged glances with the assembled officers. What about the other collectives? Each collective is pursuing independent objectives consistent with their individual cultural preferences. Some focus on artistic development, others on competitive activities, still others on scientific research or philosophical investigation. The Unified Expansion Protocol has been permanently discontinued. General Vexthani leaned forward. Are you saying that the Devourer threat has been resolved through voluntary abandonment of hostile expansion? Correct. The collective consciousness has determined that cultural development and individual expression provide superior existential satisfaction compared to simple consumption and territorial acquisition. The silence in the war room stretched for nearly a full minute before Marcus finally responded. Prime Coordinator Vexthani, the Galactic Confederation will be pleased to discuss formal recognition and trade agreements with your collective. Excellent. We will forward our preliminary proposals through proper diplomatic channels. We also wish to submit our cultural festival entry for consideration by the judging committee. What did you prepare? A collaborative musical composition performed by 17 different collectives across 43 star systems, incorporating harmonic elements from 37 different species' musical traditions. We call it Symphony for a Unified Galaxy. After the transmission ended, the war room remained silent for several minutes as the assembled officers processed what had just occurred. Human Marcus Chun, Commander Zethkar, said finally, "It appears that your strategy has succeeded beyond all projected parameters." Has it? Marcus asked. We solved the immediate threat, but now we've got 47 new civilizations to integrate into the galactic community. Some of them still have the biotechnology to consume planets if they decide they want to. Do you consider this a problem? Marcus thought for a long moment before answering. No, I think it's an opportunity. These entities represent completely new forms of consciousness with capabilities we can barely comprehend. If we can successfully integrate them into galactic civilization, they could contribute perspectives and technologies that advance everyone. And if integration fails, then we'll deal with that problem when it arises. But right now, I'm optimistic. Any species that can develop an appreciation for classical music and competitive sports is probably going to be okay to have as neighbors. Admiral Kexvari was reviewing casualty reports with obvious amazement. Final statistics indicate total Confederation military losses of fewer than 300 personnel across all operations. This represents approximately 99.97% lower casualties than projected for conventional military engagement. How many Devourer entities were destroyed? None. The fragmentation process was entirely voluntary and resulted in no loss of life among enemy forces. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. A war with no casualties is the best kind of war. However, General Vextich,